Well, we're starting to get a full house, and I want to make sure we make the best use of our time. So we'll just start. I'm only going to talk for a little bit, and Tom is also here to share his expertise, but really we wanted this just to be an open conversation with everybody about CS and content area integration. So just to start, my name is Sarah Carter. I'm the STEM and computer science specialist at the Minnesota Department of Education. I've been there 6 months now, maybe. It's a recent for me. Prior to that, I worked at Twin Cities Public Television on a program called SciGirls, which is all about integrating both STEM and computer science, and doing a lot of work on gender equity. Before that, I was also a librarian at the Science Museum of Minnesota, and a 5th and 6th grade teacher in St. Paul Public Schools. So kind of been all around, both informal and formal education, and really excited to be at the Minnesota Department of Education. And I'll let Tom introduce himself.
Yeah, so my name is Tom Cozzolino. I teach in St. Paul Public Schools currently. I'm I guess my title is Inquiry Learning Lead at Hamlin Elementary, but it's kind of one of those positions that wears multiple hats. I help facilitate a makerspace for a little bit. I help teachers do more kind of hands-on projects in the classroom. We try to do some coding, so it's kind of one of those all-around positions. I've also been a 5th grade teacher in the past, where I kind of got started with computer science. I used to coach First Lego League. That was my experience to kind of get into the world of computer science. I did that for about 6 or 7 years and really just looked for ways to do that more in the classroom. And that kind of led me to a full-time makerspace role. So I did that for a couple of years, and now I'm in kind of this hybrid coaching role. So I've worn a few hats, but really a theme of just integrating coding, computer science, these types of thinking skills in the classroom.
Awesome, and thanks, Tom, for co-facilitating this. So just wanted to, so here's a reminder about the shared notes document. If you have resources that you're talking about, as we get into our conversation and sharing, feel free to add them here with links so people can find them later. We can also add a few to as you're talking in case you don't have access to it. And I just wanted to start out with a few resources that have been kind of helpful for me thinking about content area integration, but of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, if we didn't talk about distance learning, right? This is our reality right now, so I think we have to also talk about that. I have really dug into the MNCodes distance learning resources. It is a great, very comprehensive list. There's so many lists of resources out there, I know, but this list in particular, I feel like kind of covers all of them. And there are some really great ones specifically looking at content integration. So if you haven't taken a look at that document, I would definitely look at that. And this link is also, all these links are also in the shared notes document. I would say the Minnesota Department of Education, MDE, also has put together a large list of distance learning resources. And you know, it's very extensive, but there's some good stuff in there as well. And then thinking about content area integration, a couple of resources that have been really useful for me. I have absolutely enjoyed computational thinking and coding for every student. It's a book that unfortunately I left at my desk, and I can't get back to my desk. So as soon as state government opens up again, I'm really excited to go back and grab it because I've used it quite a bit. Just really good explanations of kind of the basics of computer science, which I find really helpful when I'm thinking about integration, and some really good examples of integration in different content areas. And then one of the other resources I wanted to share is this guide to inclusive computer science education. So this was put out by Microsoft, and in one of the slides that Andrea shared just at the end there, she had that really great what do you call it, graphic that talked about diversity and inclusion and access, and that comes from this resource. It has, what I like best about it is it has really specific things that you can do both in the classroom or at a district or a building level. Because I think one of the best things about computer science integration across content areas is that you really help address kind of that equity and access issue. If you're doing it in more places, then more students have access to it. So I think this is a really great resource as well. So I wanted to start our conversation sharing some of these. And I wanted to also give Tom a chance if he had some kind of resources that he's used or some places he's gone to kind of share to start off the conversation as well.
Sure. One place I can share. So we've done the MNCodes cohort for about, I think, 5 or 6 years now. I can't remember. I think it's our 5th year of completing it this year. And each year, as part of that cohort, members are asked to create a project that shares or integrates computer science into curriculum areas. So that's freely available on our MNCodes website. So if you head to the MNCodes.org, and I believe it's under a resources tab, you can see a couple databases there. And there is a huge collection of Educator created resources. I see a few alumni in our chat here today that have created and shared projects. So that's a great place to start, is at mncodes.org/resources. There's all kinds of different ways of integrating computer science, from robotics to Scratch to you name it, all the way from K to 12. And just so you know, we are in the process of kind of refreshing that database and making it a little easier to navigate. When we first started, we didn't think about future and how big this could potentially grow. So at this point, it's a huge list of all these different projects that cohort members have shared, and we're working with a local group here to make that filterable and searchable. So hopefully within the next few months, you'll see a updated kind of refreshed version of that database. But that's a great place to start for ideas to integrate computer science as well.
And honestly, I think some of the best ways to get started is to, take a sample lesson that somebody has done and give it a try. And that then you can kind of get the feel of how does what you're doing connect to some of these kind of computational thinking ideas. So we have about 20 minutes, which I think is a great amount of time to have a kind of a conversation. So there's some questions that I want to start with. And kind of looking at, I think if we start with the first one, I'd love to hear some folks that have been working on integrating computer science into content areas about some successes and or challenges that you've had, so we can kind of share the learning with the whole group. So feel free to unmute yourself, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, go ahead and type in the chat. But just some examples of successes and or challenges.
So, hi everyone, Holly Nelson here. It was fun to see some undergrads or elementary ed majors join, and we do some work with St. Ben's and St. John's universities in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Anyways, every year we've had a group of students come to our school and work in the classrooms, and it tends to be robotic specific to the grade level. But one thing that we've learned is that we're able to have our classroom teachers learn along with the college students, and I help facilitate these different lessons with the college students and then the university professor. And if you ever want to hook up with a professor in that area, Diana Fenton, Fenton, I'll put it in the chat, but she's great. We've worked on some great projects, and I'll just highlight 2 of them real quick. We used Ozobots. They're fairly cheap. And we had, actually the way we integrated was looking into the language arts subject area of story progression, like how a story starts out and the events in the middle of a story and how a story ends. And then what we took then was kids coded with, if you don't know what Ozobots are, they use lines and different progressions of lines based off of color and sequences of making the little robot follow the line and do certain things. So we'll have ideas of the story. The kids draw it out basically like a map through the story, and the robot does certain things that match with those story events. So we'll start out usually with like an unplugged activity to get the kids kind of understanding what computational thinking is, and we do a lot of work with growth mindset. So it's a great way to kind of refer back, but integrating it into that literacy piece was a huge success. We ran into some bugs here and there with the Ozo bots and the markers, and but just everybody learning together was just a really fun experience. And those events with the university students have just expanded now to using spheros and using the dash robots, and so it's really fun to see how that can really work, and not be afraid to try something. And college students are usually pretty willing to try because they haven't had a lot of failures. And so for them to learn from their experience has been just awesome.
Holly, can I ask if you have a resource that you particularly like for thinking about computational thinking with students, for folks that are kind of new to those ideas?
I could put it in the chat. I can kind of look. I have Barefoot Computing is a great one, and these are things that I haven't found on my own. It's usually from the cohort, because the cohort gave me so many resources that I can never claim any of them as my own. But yeah, the Barefoot Computing is good. I can type that in the chat as well.
That'd be great, thanks. And I know that Barefoot Computing is also on the I'm pretty sure it's on the MNCodes list for distance learning. So that's another spot where you can find the list. I think the other resource that I really like for that is the CS Unplugged work, which there's also a link for that, but I can add it in here in the MNCodes distance learning. That has some really great kind of integration activities. But I love the idea of using Ozobots for like kind of mapping stories. It's such a really interesting idea, allowing students to, figure out like what happened first. So you could go straight, then you can maybe spin in a circle, or Ozobots are really fun to use. I love that idea. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Holly.
I just saw, Don in the chat shared that Ozobots have an online option now that you can do with no robots. I mean, that could be a fun thing to check into too.
Yeah, I was noticing there was some conversation in the chat about being able to use robots because they really are so engaging for students, but in this distance learning here. So love the idea that Ozobots can be online. That's really cool as well. I did not know that. I'm gonna have to go look that up now too. So other folks that want to share about successes related to integrating computer science and content areas?
I'm from another state, from Texas, and we utilize a lot of code.org resources. I had one of the code.org trainers come to the school and actually train all the teachers at the school. And that was kind of nice because I worked with him and was able to pull some of the lessons that actually correlate with some of the TEKs that we teach. And the teachers could see how they could bring coding into the classroom without being an added activity, because they have so much going on, especially now. And 10 to 1, that's how we're going to start the year, is online next year. So, trying to utilize those types of resources. And I like how you guys mentioned that the robots are online, because we were using a lot of Ozobots at our school too. So that's kind of nice to have that extra resource to fall back on.
That's great to hear. Thanks for joining us all the way from Texas. That's fun. Yeah, code.org can be a great place to start and kind of get kids started with coding. And it's nice for teachers too, that it's very kind of self-guided, and they have lots of lessons there. And it ties really well with Scratch too. Scratch is another block-based programming language that's a little bit more open-ended. For me personally, I've used Scratch a lot in the classroom, and I've always started with code.org to kind of get kids used to the idea of coding with blocks and then move them into Scratch. Where we can integrate into content a little more. For me, I always try to look for like, where are those kind of natural connections with content area? I think Holly was talking about, writing stories and narratives. Things like Scratch can work really well with that too, because it breaks it apart nicely into like sprites that can be different characters of a story, or backdrops that can be backgrounds, and kids can kind of just interact with their stories in lots of cool ways that can make it a little bit interactive, or like a choose your own story type adventure. So Scratch can be a really powerful tool for integrating into content area too.
Yeah, I agree about that with Scratch. I think it has so many opportunities for students to be kind of creative and take things their own way, in a way that some other platforms don't as much. And if there are folks that are interested in code.org, you can very easily learn it on your own. But there is also training in Minnesota. If that's something you're interested in, you can always go to their website and look for training. Let's see. I'm going to take up. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have something to share. I'm also just taking a look at the chat here and seeing if there's
Hello.
questions coming up. Go ahead.
My name is Francisco with the College of St. Scholastica, and just joined that team. Previously worked with New York City's Department of Education CS for All team. I guess one of the biggest things I've just kind of been grappling the last couple of years is just with integration. No, I think Annie mentioned, there's no one's asking. We don't have, I guess, elementary school teachers asking for new curriculum, right? They're asking for more time if that's what's it. And so I've always been just questioning about why are we, and how is it asking so much for teachers who are already implementing so much curriculum to implement a new program, right? And new curriculum. So there's that role of integration. How can we rely on tech integrationists, or is tech integrationist the kind of like that role where there's probably no curriculum that being held accountable for? Is that a better role? Like, who is better positioned to kind of integrate some of this content based off all the different asks and needs of a school district, right? I've encountered, and so part of this is math and literacy is real, and we have a lot of students failing at that in a lot of schools. And so are we burdening, are we taxing it? How do we know integration works? How do we know I haven't ran across, I think, a study that says like it's helping our math and literacy. That's one of the golden tickets. We see students having fun and we see the engagement, but how do we kind of become more efficient about the use of our time? And who do we leverage to kind of take on that load when we're already asking so much of teachers and that classroom time?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And, you also got to think about who's responding to that question, right? Like for me personally, I'm a huge advocate for computer science. I'm very passionate about pushing the classroom because in my own classroom, I've seen it's really transformed the way kids interact with that like core content areas, right? Like math, for example, and using Scratch. Scratch has a lot of like data functionality of manipulating variables, things like that. And it allows students to kind of interact with those ideas of variables and equations in much different ways than would be able to otherwise, right? So when you're looking for integrating computer science, I think it has the potential to be integrated in really powerful ways that really transform and strengthen the teaching and learning that happens. But on the flip side of that coin, for that to happen, we have to be familiar and comfortable enough with the tools and resources that are there. And like you said, there's so many requests and asks of teachers, whether it's they have to teach a certain curriculum or they have to attend so much PD from a district or wherever. So it's just really fine line to balance, right? I think if we can help teachers see computer science as a so-called tool in their tool belt, it can become very powerful, but that does take, time and energy to do. And just to be honest, right now, there's not a lot of professional development around computer science. So I think that's why Andrea and Code Savvy kind of started the cohort, was to help teachers really see that the potential that computer science has, because when you can start to see the really kind of natural connections between variables in Scratch, or say robotics with things like distance measuring or structure and function or things like that. Like, there's a lot of places that the computer science tools can really enhance what's being taught in the classroom. So there is, there's no perfect answer for that, but you could say that for anything in education, right? With all the requirements and standards and testing, it's just a matter of kind of rethinking, in my mind, in my opinion at least, it's a matter of rethinking computer science as like a subject or a topic, and kind of shifting that over to thinking of computer science as like a tool to teach other topics and contents in lots of different ways that can then hook some students different ways and have them engage with that content in different ways.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of kind of media specialists that are often kind of leading this work in their building and, helping support teachers in thinking about this. I think at Minnesota Department of Education, we have a lot of conversations about bundling, even just across content areas. So, if you're planning a unit, try and figure out how you can, pull some stuff from social studies and math and do that together. And so, kind of thinking about computer science in the same way. This is not something new. It's something, that, as Tom was saying, that connects with something you're already doing. And of course, all of that requires thinking time, which requires professional development time, which requires support at a building level, and really understanding, what are the reasons behind, why is it important that we get, kind of equity of access to computer science and computational thinking ideas. And there's some great resources out there at the kind of the district and building level to think about why this is important. I think the way I think about it, I think it's important for it to come from the top and from the bottom. I think you have to have this big picture thinking about this is important for our students and this is why we believe it's important. But then you also have to have the kind of teachers that are passionate about it as well and can provide examples and can, pull in their coworkers who also are willing to give it a try as well. So I think it's really important to have this conversation. And I really appreciate you bringing it up, Francisco, because I think we often kind of take it for granted and just dive in without talking about the costs for, trying something new.
I'm just gonna piggyback on that, Sarah, too. Really looking at the lessons and looking at units and collaborating and being a media specialist. I feel like I have a good handle on the curriculum across the building. And if I don't know what something is, I have the resources to look that up across the grade levels. But one of the things like we worked on, for example, was spheros in a 4th grade classroom. It was in a social studies class. Instead of just reading from the social studies textbook, the kids were going to learn about different regions of the United States. So we broke the kids into the 5 main regions of the United States. And those kids then, and it was really easy. I just took the sections of the United States and on the smartboard, make a big version of it for the floor. And then the kids as a group met and used their textbook, used the internet on their Chromebooks, and figured out what are the economic resources, what are all the different parts that they had to learn. So we put out those lists of things that the kids had to learn for social studies. The kids investigated those. They used their curriculum. They used their class time that they would have been reading through a textbook anyways, but opened up all those resources. And then the kids, when they had all of that, each student put together a slide for their Google slideshow, and they're going to present that for their region. And then in the end, we took the spheros, and the kids presented to their class by coding the sphero to go from one part of the region to the next. And each student then had a slide, and they explained their slide. and and taught the whole class. So instead of all of the kids having to research every region, each group was able to present, and those kids still talk about how they know about those parts because it was very visual, and that was the computer science piece was put in there. So I think but that all takes like that collaboration and that time, but it can really be powerful for students and be very inclusive for kids too. You look at students we have a lot of students that speak Somali, and for them to really learn about the country and listen and talk with their peers instead of sitting with a textbook and having to do worksheets or whatever. So it's pretty powerful when it's done really integrated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the opportunity for kind of personalization is strong. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thanks, Holly. So we just have a little bit of time left. I think maybe just 1 minute. So I'm just going to wrap it up. If there's additional kind of resources you think of, feel free to add them into the notes doc. I'm going to kind of go through the chat and make sure that some of the stuff that folks shared gets added to that shared notes doc. And of course, because we're using the free Zoom, we're running out of time. But the next set of sessions start at 10:40. And there is one that is CS and K5, which may be an interesting one if you're kind of continuing to think about this elementary school. Tom, is there anything else we need to share before we wrap up?
No, I just put a link to the Padlet that Andrea shared earlier too, just as another place we can kind of share resources and connect any takeaways. And then be sure to head back to the website, MNCodes.org/digital_CSPD in order to navigate to the next sessions. And again, there's no easy answers to these conversations. We could continue to talk about them indefinitely, but I think it's great to just hear other perspectives and ideas. So thank you everyone for sharing all your thoughts and ideas and questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the morning. And yeah, we're happy to continue these conversations. My contact information is in the shared notes document. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah.